I'm standing here in the hills behind Shankill, in an area once known as Death Valley. In the late 19th century, certain companies sought to scrape every drop of lead they could from these hills. The chimney behind me was built in order to extract even more lead from the toxic fumes that rose from the smelter in the valley below. But this often came at a great cost. Many of those employed here died early due to lead poisoning as they scraped the lead from inside the flue. Furthermore, the toxic fumes that arose from the chimney led to greater mortality rates among livestock and humans. And the valley around us is still empty and barren and lifeless, without any vegetation, due to the effects of the mining. But in 1913, even though the company ceased operations then, the effects were still here. The effects were irreversible of all that they caused, both in the lives of those who perished and in the landscape here at the same time. But you know, each of us has to face the valley of death at some point. Maybe over recent years you've had to face it in a loved one who you had to watch walk through that experience. Or perhaps you have yourself been awakened to a sense of your own mortality, perhaps even a fear of death. The valley of death is something that we all have to walk through. But this Easter, we want to give you hope. Not just hope of a life that doesn't face death, but hope of life in the face of death. Hope that walks through the valley of death with a hope of coming out the other side with life abundant. And that's what we all want, isn't it? We want the barrenness of this area around us to be filled with life. We want life to overflow and death and decay to be reversed. I wonder how you would have felt if you lived at the time of Jesus. Maybe you would have watched on from a distance as he performed certain miracles. As you watched him heal a man's hand that was withered and restore it whole again. As he takes a woman over here who's been bent over, who doctors cannot help, and makes her upright again. And it seems that decay and the effects of this world on these people had been reversed. Perhaps a little while later, you watch as a religious leader comes running to Jesus. His daughter is on the verge of death. Teacher, come quickly before it's too late. Jesus consents and goes with the man, but he's held up on the way. Another woman requires his attention. By the time he makes it to the man's house, the little girl is dead. The man is despairing, but Jesus counsels him, do not worry, only believe. And he goes in and that girl is raised back to life. Again, you watch another day as two sisters send news to Jesus that the man whom he loves, a great friend of his, is on the brink of death. Come quickly before it's too late. But Jesus purposefully delays, arriving only once the man has been dead and buried for 4 days. He arrives and the sisters fall at his feet. Lord, if you had only been here, our brother would not have died. I don't know whether they thought that Jesus was just a good doctor who could heal sick people but could do nothing for the dead. Or maybe they thought he just didn't care about death. But either way, Jesus comforts them. He looks at them and he says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he dies, yet shall he live. And with a word, he commands the man to come forth from the grave, and he comes out alive after being dead for 4 days. And perhaps as you watched on at these things, hope would begin to rise in you. Is it true that in this man Jesus, there is hope of life? Can this man really turn around the effects of death and decay in this world and fill them with life instead? Perhaps a little later your hopes will come crashing down as you watch this same man who seemed to have such power over death go on trial. The religious leaders and the Roman governors both hate him, they mock him, they crown him with thorns, they beat him. You watch as he answers nothing, in complete meekness, submitting to their horrible treatment. You watch as he is savagely flogged with a cat of 9 tails, the skin ripped from his back. You watch as this weakened man carries a heavy wooden cross up a hillside. You watch as the soldiers drive hard, cold nails through his limbs and raise him up. And as he takes his last agonizing breath on that cross, your hope dies within you. How could it be that this man who seemed to turn back the effects of death and decay could himself submit to such death at the hands of men? How could it be? Jesus is the Prince of Life. He is the author of life. He is the source of life, the sustainer of life. He is the only one who could truly say, I am the life. How then could he die in such a way? Our sin, our rebellion against God, our rejection of him has consequences. It leads to barrenness, emptiness, decay, death. As we reject God, we reject the one who is the source of life. And so we end up only with death. And just like this valley in the landscape around us, the effects of it are irreversible. It's filled with barrenness and emptiness and death, even after all this time. We cannot turn back the effects of our sin. We cannot turn back the effects of death. It's impossible, no matter how hard we try, no matter how good we are, no matter how much we do, the effects are irreversible. The wages of sin is death. But as Jesus hung on that cross, the author of life dying on that cross, he did not die there for a death due to himself, for he was the source of life. But he died there a death for humanity. He died there in our place, taking the due of death that we owed, the debt of death that we owed. He took that. He paid those wages of sin, that is death. And he suffered there, agonizing on that cross, not for himself, but for us. I wonder how his disciples must have felt in that hour as they watched him draw that last painful breath. All their hopes came crashing down, dashed as he, the one that they had put their hope in for life, lay lifeless as they watched him be buried in the ground. Was this the end? Did death always have to have the last word? Was death the victor always? Is there no hope of life over death? But then, 3 days later, news begins to spread. As the sun rises over the city of Jerusalem, so the news rises up from the lips of the people in the city. He's been seen alive. And then all of a sudden, it's not just news. Jesus is there in the midst of his friends, with them, alive again. Death could not hold him. The author of life rose again from the dead, triumphing over it. And with his victory, he showed that he had walked through the valley of death. Death no longer had the last word. The effects of it were no longer irreversible. But because of his rising from the dead, he showed that the effects of death and decay in this world could be turned back, and life abundant could be the last word. Jesus Christ walked the valley of death for us, not for himself, but he came out the other side alive. And today he offers to each one this abundant life, true life, new life, eternal life that laughs in the face of death, because he has walked through death already on our behalf. And he offers everyone this Easter time and every day of the year to come and have this eternal life that can only come from the one who has triumphed over death, the author of life himself. Do not live in the barrenness and the emptiness, the irreversible life of death and decay, but come to Jesus and have true life today. And that is the message we want to leave with you this Easter time.